All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you all, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us. My name is Kyle Tribble, and I serve as Director of Culture and Engagement here at the School District's Office of DEI. And I'm very grateful for you taking the time to stop by and welcome you to Ramadan 2024 Awareness Panel Discussion, which is a segment under our Equity in Practice series. Equity Practice is pretty much a series that looks to highlight conversations around equity, cultural awareness, and social justice. Before we begin, I just want to outline today's format for today's panel and also outline what we hope to achieve as a result of the panel. So first, the goal of the discussion today is to make all SDP staff, community members aware of the month of Ramadan and provide insight on how we can all collectively support those who are fasting during the month. We want this session to be informative and also correct any misconceptions there may be. Secondly, in regards to our panel format, we will hear from 5 of our panelists, which is a mixture between SDP staff, community leaders, and our amazing student leaders here at the school district. In hopes of addressing as many topics as possible in the allotted time that we have, we will not have a Q&A session. However, we appreciate everyone for submitting their questions ahead of time for today's panel and hope to drive the conversation. We definitely appreciate your support with that. Many of the questions today, like I said, will drive today's conversation. And for all of those Ramadan-related questions that were not answered, we will be sure to forward an answer to all attendees after the session concludes. With that, we want to take some time to just ask that all attendees remain on mute during this time, and we greatly appreciate it. Now, I'm going to move forward to introducing our panel, and I'm happy to start with our 2 guests, our guests and community partners. So I will start with Asiya Jones. Asiya Jones is born and raised in Philadelphia. She's a graduate of LaSalle University, receiving both her bachelor's in science and public health in 2021 and her master's in public health in 2022. During her time in graduate school, she had the pleasure of interning with the Philadelphia City Hall under Councilman at Large Isaiah Thomas, where she led Enough is Enough, a Students Against Gun Violence campaign. She currently works for the Philadelphia chapter of the Council of American Islamic Relations as the Youth Leadership and Advocacy Project Coordinator. Asiya is also was the former regional director of Philadelphia chapter of the Muslim Interscholastic Tournament. While there, since 2016, she has started as a competitor, and she serves on the Nationals Operations Committee. She also volunteers as an assistant Girl Scout troop leader. Outside of her work, Asiya loves traveling and a good adrenaline rush. Over the past 2 years, she has crossed out skydiving and hang gliding from her bucket list. So thank you, Asiya, for joining us. Also, we have Dr. Kaiser Abdullah. And Dr. Abdullah serves as Director of Muslim Engagement within the Mayor's Office here in the city of Philadelphia. Dr. Abdullah also serves as on the board of the chair of the International Interfaith Philadelphia and is the co-president of the Association for Conflict Resolution. He is also the co-chair of the Mayor's Commission on Faith-Based and Interfaith Affairs in Philadelphia. Dr. Abdullah is also one of the imams at Masjid Aqba and serves as a chairman and COO of the Aqba Institute, which is a 70-year-old organization that has established social institutions that support the Muslim community here in Philadelphia. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for joining us. Then we'll move on to Dr. Danielle T. Willis. Dr. Willis serves as the Senior Project Manager in the Office of Professional Learning here at the district, where she oversees online learning and learning management system and manages operation for district-wide professional development days. Prior to joining the School District of Philadelphia, Dr. Willis was Associate Director and Research Assistant Professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She also has held past roles at Cesar Chavez Public School in Washington, D.C., and the D.C. Office of the State Superintendent of Education. Dr. Willis is originally from the South Bronx, New York. She is committed to supporting success success in urban schools, and promoting access to an excellent education for all students. Dr. Willis is a Muslim and embraced Islam in 2008. She is an active member of her masjid in the Philadelphia chapter of the International League of Muslim Women. Thank you so much, Dr. Willis, for being here. And then we also have our two students, student leaders. So we're very happy to have them. We have Doha Gasm, who is a current high school junior at the Academy of Palumbo, and serves as the student board representative alternative for the school district of Philadelphia. Thank you so much, Doha, for joining us. We also have Riot Shihab, who is currently a high school sophomore at Bodine High School. Riot is also a great student leader and serves as a member of his Muslim Student Association at Bodine. So finally, we want to introduce our moderator for today's session, which we're very grateful for, Noreen Ignacio, formerly known as Noreen Sheikh Yusuf. Noreen is a Palestinian American Muslim and has worked as a PLS supporting Learning Network 1. Noreen has worked with the school district of Philadelphia for 15 years, 4 years in her current role, and 11 years as a high school math teacher. Thank you, Noreen. I will pass it to you to start off and begin the conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kyle. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our forum today. We're going to kick it off with the basics, and we're going to start with our Director of Muslim Engagement and our representative from CARE Philadelphia. So Dr. Abdullah and Asaya Jones, what is Ramadan and why is it significant in the Muslim community?
Good afternoon, everyone. Kaiser Abdullah, as mentioned. And just one slight correction, Masjid Kuba, and I'm not the CEO. I don't know. I don't want y'all to try to get me in trouble on my first public appearance in this in this role. So I am one of the imams there, but not the CEO there. Trying to get me fired. So with that being said, when you think of Ramadan, right? First of all, Ramadan is one of the, I'll start at the top, right? Ramadan is one of the pillars of Islam. So it being one of the pillars of Islam, it means that Muslims who acknowledge the 5 pillars, they're required to observe these 5 pillars. And without going into a lot of detail about it, it's the test, bearing witness that there's one God, that Muhammad is the messenger of God, praying 5 times a day, giving charity, a certain amount of charity, fasting in Ramadan, and making the pilgrimage to Mecca. Those are the 5 pillars. And Ramadan, fasting this month of Ramadan, 29 or 30 days, is one of those pillars. So those who are observing and practicing in that particular way, you would find them fasting 29 or 30 days, with some exceptions, which you don't need to get into presently. Another key component of this is, why do they have to fast? I think this comes directly from the Quran, where Allah says, "O you who believe," meaning those who have submitted to God, that fasting is commanded upon us the same way it was commanded on those who came before us. Because when we as Muslims, we understand that Islam is not just the only revelation, but there were revelations that came before that. So we fast the same way Jews fast, same way Christians fast, and stuff like that. So, and the very last thing I'll say, not to belabor this, is that the month is a very special month because it's a month in which the Quran was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it's a book that we all follow. So those 3 things are the things I would highlight and pass it on to Asia.
Yeah. So assalamu alaikum, everybody. Good afternoon now. My name is Asia. So yeah, of Ramadan. So it's just like Imam Dr. Kaiser has said. But it's the 9th month in the Islamic lunar calendar. So it's a time where Muslims are fasting. So from sunrise to sunset. I know like there's the common question we get that like the whole 30 days that we're not eating the whole time, but it's just sunrise to sunset that Muslims are not eating, and they're refraining from food, drinking, smoking, intimate contact from sunrise to sunset. So before we have sahur, like so breakfast in the early in the morning, and then we have iftar, which is like dinner at night. And then 2 other things to add, that it's also a time where we're focusing on improving our relationship with our religion. So we're working on like self-restraint. So being able to like, I work remotely, so not having to restrain from like just walking to the kitchen all the time and things like that. We're focuses on that self-restraint, and then more God consciousness. So you're purposely trying to do better and learn more. And then it's important and significant for the Muslim community in another time, because it's really a time where like you come together as a community and you really like, you have iftars in the masjid. So it's all these community members coming together at times you may not always see them. So I think that also adds to like the spirit of the month as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and just to say one last thing there, right? Asia, I love how you highlighted all of these things, right? So this idea of escalating the spirituality is really, really significant. So if ever you need if ever you're trying to get an apology from somebody who identifies as Muslim, approach them in Ramadan. You might just get that apology that you're seeking more than any other time of the year.
Yeah, and one thing to add too is that because it is a time where you're trying to do better, like no matter anyone's like level of religion, like this is a time where we're all trying to do better. So it is a time where we see that people try to be more religious. They might come wearing a scarf for the first time or things like that. And we want to embrace that, because this is the month where, of course, all throughout the year we should try to do better, but this is the month that Muslims really, really try. So keeping that in mind as well.
Thank you so much. And then I do want to just also make one clarification, because I know that in the Muslim community, we always say sunrise to sunset is when we're fasting. But to clarify, sunrise to us when we're talking about fasting is fajr, which is the break of dawn, which is a little like an hour earlier than the actual sunrise, approximately. So I just wanted to make that clarification. So we're waking up before the break of dawn in order to eat so that we can pray fajr and begin our fast. We're going to move on. Asiya, we're going to stick with you. How long does Ramadan last? And why does Ramadan start on a different day each year? So this is going to be for you and for Ra'id, one of our student representatives.
Yeah, I'll let Ra'id go first if that's okay. And then I'll like expand on whatever he said. Yeah.
I believe Ryan actually dropped out.
I had to reconnect. I'm sorry.
So my apologies.
It's okay. Ramadan is determined by the Islamic lunar calendar when we see the sighting of the crescent moon, and is determined when it ends when you see the new crescent moon. And it lasts around, like Dr. Abdullah said, 29 to 30 days approximately, depending on the sighting of the new crescent moon.
And then, so yeah, exactly. So like that 29 to 30 days. And I think one of the important things that gets confused is when it comes to we follow, or people, some Muslims follow the like local sightings or international sightings. So for example, this year you might have students or, you know, friends that started fasting Monday, some started fasting Tuesday. So international sighting is, so like Saudi Arabia, if they sight the moon, people will follow like that sighting, and then local sighting. So on Sunday night, it was very like hard to see the sky. So people in Philadelphia or like locally were like, we can't sight the moon. So they followed that local sighting and went with the next day. So also it's not always like a trick if people are coming and fasting on different days. It's just depending on which sighting they observe.
One more thing to add there, based on the question, why does it start at a different time each year? Just understanding that the Gregorian calendar, the solar calendar, differs from the lunar calendar by roughly about 12 days each year. So, so if you saw that a Muslim was fasting in April of last year, and then this year they started fasting in March, it's not like they're making it up. The lunar calendar is literally a couple of weeks shorter each year. So each year it moves up by a couple of weeks. So 5 years ago, they may have been fasting in the summer, and now we might be fasting closer in the spring. So just something to keep in mind as you see the days shift each year. And that's why it's also important in terms of thinking about the school district's calendar, as well as why it would shift as the years go by.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. And you addressed the next question briefly when you were answering our first. But is fasting during the month of Ramadan a religious requirement for all Muslims? And so this question is going to go to you, Dr. Abdullah, and also to Dr. Willis.
So Dr. Willis, since I've been speaking a bit, let me invite your voice into the space, and then I'll add on anything else. I'll come in after.
All right, thank you, Dr. Abdullah. So fasting is required for all healthy Muslims of the age of maturity or responsibility. And that's typically about puberty or 12 years old. And then within that expectation, there are some that might be exempt from fasting or even maybe prohibited from fasting at certain times. And so if you're elderly, if you are physically or mentally incapable of fasting, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, if you're traveling a certain distance from your home even, you may be exempt from fasting, right? Where it might not be an obligation or temporarily not an obligation. And then you're also prohibited from fasting while you're menstruating. And so Dr. Abdullah said earlier, there's some circumstances where people may be fasting 29 days or less. And so there's some circumstances in between there. And then I also just wanted to note that even though it might be a requirement or an obligation for some Muslims, it was mentioned this is a communal experience. And so you will find that the younger Muslims are invited to participate. And it's important for them to be developing that spiritual discipline early. And so I had a colleague ask me, are elementary school students, are they going to be fasting? Are they going to be praying or, wondering what to expect? And you might find that even some of the younger Muslims are interested in fasting and praying and may want to be accommodated, and that's normal and encouraged.
Thank you, Dr. Willis. I think in terms of the requirement for all Muslims, right? Yes, as Dr. Willis pointed out, it is a requirement for those who ascribe to Islam. One of the things I want to highlight in terms of sensitivity, right? You may know that someone identifies as Muslim. It is not necessarily on us to say, hey, it's Ramadan, why aren't you fasting, right? One, it can be a very personal reason that they are not obligated to share. So I think when it comes to sensitivity around the religious requirement of fasting, there needs to be a certain level of discretion and allowance for privacy in terms of how folks choose to engage that month of fasting, whether it be due to a prohibition, an allowance to not fast, or just in some cases a choice to not do it, right? Because that is where that is definitely all of those things are understood within the group of Muslims or the community of Muslims, as it were. Yeah.
Nori, can I just add one additional thing since we're talking about the obligation to fast? Sometimes people wonder, like, if you're not fasting, then are you not observing Ramadan? And I also just wanted to quickly add that, like, fasting is a focal point in this conversation, but throughout the month, Muslims are doing other things to observe Ramadan. And so if you're not fasting or you're temporarily not fasting, you will find Muslims increasing their charity, increasing their prayer, their good deeds, and other forms of worship. And so just not to think that if someone's not fasting, they're not participating in Ramadan.
Yeah, thank you for that. And also I know that a lot of our principals are very aware and they're doing a really good job about providing accommodations for students who are fasting, but also just keeping in mind that you might have students that come to you that aren't able to fast, that still might want to eat in private or something like that, just so that it isn't put on display that they aren't fasting, so that they don't receive those types of questions. What are the fasting requirements during Ramadan? And should I refrain from having my Muslim students and staff around food? So this question is going to go to Doha, our other student leader, who's also an alternate member on the school board, and to Dr. Willis again.
Well, during this holy month of Ramadan, practicing Muslims observe the fast are required to abstain from all foods and drinks from dawn until sunset, but this also includes having the best of character during this month. But while fasting Muslims should try to avoid direct exposure to food and drinks when possible, as they should try to avoid that exposure, as it can make fasting a little more difficult. And we understand that completely restricting all events with food is not always feasible, especially throughout a school setting. But I believe what would be most helpful in accommodating is for the school to have designated alternate areas for those fasting and who can sit out during meal times away from cafeterias or locations that have food.
Absolutely. Just to add on to what Doha said, and she mentioned the best of character, and I just want to add in terms of the fast, there's a lot of attention to the fast of the stomach, but we're also fasting with our eyes and our ears. And part of that, striving for the best of character means avoiding gossip and profanity. And this is really for like my colleagues and staff colleagues, if you don't want to invite us to lunch, right? Because you want to be sensitive. But you might also find that like, we don't want to hear the gossip, right? Or the water cooler conversation, or you might find us kind of staying to ourselves a little bit to just try to preserve that. And so in terms of being sensitive to eating around us, like that's very thoughtful, but also not bringing other types of things that might, impact the quality of our fast would be really, really helpful as well.
Dr. Liz, thank you for highlighting that. I know that when I was a teacher, one thing that I used to do to help my students focus on like independent practice was I would play music. And so if you're a teacher that does things like that, maybe something that you can do is just play instrumentals instead of playing music with lyrics or something like that. That can be an easy shift to make while you're still keeping the culture of your classroom, but also being sensitive to students who don't want to hear certain lyrics. Dr. Abdullah, I saw you come off of mute for a moment. Did you want to add something?
No, I think the only thing I was going to say here was to tie into this is that during this month, as Muslims are trying to re-engage their spirituality and deepen their connection with the Creator and deepen their connection with their community and other people in the community, you will find that they have more artifacts that they bring with them, right? So what might be considered it looks like a string of beads for those who come from a different tradition, the rosary, or the dhikr beads from the Islamic tradition. So you might see them as Sister Asia pointed out earlier on, dressing differently, right? So they may be wearing the thobes or the kufis or the headscarves or the overgarments, because for many folks, the reminders, I'm going off of what Dr. Willis said, right? The reminders of how we connect to the Creator and how we get deeper in our spiritual tradition might be different for some people, right? So for some people, it's having a physical book of the Quran with them that they're using. For others, it might be dressing different to remind them of this need to engage differently during this time. So I think the way folks come into Islam in this month is something that we really need to figure out how we are honoring in our own spaces.
Thank you. Our next question are going to go to our two student representatives, Doha and Ra'id. Will my students and staff need to pray during school hours in the month of Ramadan? If so, how many times?
So yes, as observant Muslims engage in fasting, there are specific times for prayers, which includes during school hours. And this prayer that mostly occurs within a day is called Dhuhr, and that is typically and currently around 1:10 p.m. And that does change slightly every day. So it's generally just once out of the day, and students or staff may need to be excused from class times to fulfill these religious obligations while at school.
I just wanted to add that, yeah, like she said that perfectly. There is one prayer around noon or the afternoon that we have to pray, and it's mandatory. So, like, we would appreciate to be excused for that prayer, or once a day. It's only once a day. So,
Yeah, and
If I may,
yes,
so
please.
I know we're focusing on the month of Ramadan here, and the way the question is phrased is that, do they need to pray during the month of Ramadan? I think, as the students have been mentioning, right, and as observant Muslims also observe, those who are observant Muslims, Ramadan is just one month that we're focusing on, but the prayer requirement is there throughout the year, right? The only change in the prayer requirement is the time. When we turn our clocks forward or we turn our clocks back, you may see the time jump by an hour. So during the winter months, some of them may actually be praying two prayers during the day, the midday prayer, and if they have an after school program, the late afternoon prayer, depending on what's going on in the school. But generally, one prayer, as the students point out, in the middle of the day, not just in Ramadan, but throughout the year. And in some cases, in the winter months, it might be two prayers in a day because the sun sets closer to 4:30. So you may have them, if they have an after school program, they may actually have to do two prayers during the day while they're on the school ground. So just wanted to point that out in terms of the framing of the question itself.
Yeah, and you may notice that some students that have never asked to be excused to pray begin to ask to be excused to pray during Ramadan. And again, that's because we are, as Muslims, trying to connect more with our Creator during this month. And we are trying to, I know that I have a bad habit that if during the workday, if I'm really busy, I will wait to pray till I get home. And I end up praying the afternoon prayer and the late afternoon prayer at the same time. But during the month of Ramadan, I try to be more conscious of that so that I'm praying Dhuhr around 1 and I'm praying our late afternoon prayer on time as well. So that's the reason why, if you are seeing an increase in amount of students who are asking to pray during the school day, that may be the reason why. And also the length of time that it takes to pray it should not take an entire class period. It should not take an hour. The students will need approximately 10 minutes for prayer. They do need to wash up, do a quick ritual wash prior to praying, and then the prayer. So in total, I would say like 12 minutes is probably how much they would need to be excused. And so just keep that in mind, so that if you feel nervous about needing to excuse students from class in order to do this, that it is not going to take an entire class period. They won't be missing an abundant amount of instructional time. All right, so we're going to move on to our next question. This question is going to go to Dr. Willis, and then again, back to our student leaders as well, Raed and Doha. Is there anything that my students or staff members will need from school leaders before or after prayer?
Yeah, and Noreen, I think you addressed what I would offer to this question is just you mentioned the ritual washing, and so I'll just clarify that before Muslims approach our ritual prayer that we do the 5 times per day, we need to be in a state of ritual purity. And if we're not, there are some special ways that we wash up before prayer, and the most common is it's called wudu, and it only takes a couple of minutes to complete, but it does require clean water and you want a little bit of privacy and minimal distraction. And so I would just note, particularly leaders that are excusing or teachers who are excusing staff, if you send the student out to a space and you notice they take a detour, right? They're not playing around, they may be going to wash up, right? And that should only take a couple of minutes, but they may not be washing up in the same place that they're praying because they may need the water. And there's some ways to get around the water if there's no water available, like if you're on a trip, if they know how to do that. But that would be the only thing I would offer in terms of accommodations prior to prayer. And I think that they should be able to resume normal activities after prayer. But I'll invite Riot if there's anything else to add.
I just wanted to say, before prayer, we just need a private space, clean water, and a little time so we could get ready for our prayer.
And just to add on to that, with creating a space, and that should include being clean and quiet and very accessible for individuals to perform their prayers comfortably, and just generally just for school leaders to be more understanding and knowledgeable when excusing like students who may need to leave early or a little late and come late to class.
Thank you. And we all know that fasting can cause fatigue. I know that fasting has become fasting here. So my mouth is a little dry. But we know that fasting has become kind of trendy among the dietary trends in the Western culture nowadays, but we typically don't do a dry fast when we are doing that type of fast. So during Ramadan, we are doing a dry fast. So it can cause extreme fatigue. And so how can the School District of Philadelphia staff and teachers support students who are fasting and deliver their lessons effectively? So again, this is about supporting staff who may be fasting and students who may be fasting. And this is for Dr. Willis and Dr. Abdullah.
Sure. I would just say that fasting is it's a personal experience, and it might impact students and staff in different ways. So if possible, I recommend discussing what each person needs individually and trying to develop an accommodation plan. If you're a supervisor and you have one-on-ones, you can have the conversation there, teachers and working with families to understand what folks might need. But for general advice, I would say flexibility and discretion are key. Having alternatives to physically and emotionally challenging activities, especially at the end of the day, like meetings where you need to share a lot at 3 o'clock are really hard, right? And then being flexible with assignment due dates if possible, getting into the late nights and the early mornings if someone asks for flexibility and you can accommodate, that's appreciated. And then the last thing I would just say is not drawing attention or too much attention to students and staff who might need to take a break or are taking an accommodation. Modesty is a core value in Islam, and we don't want to put a show on with our fasting, right? This is worship for us. And so we're still striving to complete our responsibilities even while we're fasting. So it's not necessary to feel like you have to bend over backwards or make a big show out of it. And so those are some things I would offer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Willis. I don't have much to add to that. A couple quick things to highlight a point that was made. I think being observant, right? A lot of this is about communication and checking in, not from across the room. Like, Abdullah, you look really tired now. Do you need to take a break, right? So definitely not like that. I'd really checking in more one-on-one when the time is appropriate. You just go over, you check in and you just ask a question just to see exactly, what's going on, if this is something that would be needed. During this month, I know this hasn't come up as yet, but because Muslims are trying to get more spiritual grounding, they may be up very late at night saying prayers, right? Up late at night and early in the morning saying prayers. So this is one of the months where a lot less sleep is achieved for Muslims who are trying to engage the month. So they may look not just in the end of the day fatigued, they may look fatigued early in the morning, right? They may look tired at the start of the day. And I see some of the folks on the call smiling because you know what it's like early in the day. You are feeling tired already. So I think just being flexible, not just throughout the day. And that same room that the students spoke about, a quiet room for prayer. And I know many schools have creative spaces where they'd be not for meditation, but for a quiet area. I think allowing Muslims, allowing that space to be used for anyone who might be feeling fatigued, who may need, and whatever the policies that you set up in the school to have that space be used, that Muslims can actually step out there, use that space for whether it be 5-10 minutes, just to regroup, recharge, and come back. And I think sometimes that can absolutely be helpful. So if there's a space that is a quiet space that's not just for prayer, but can be used at other points, and when the Muslim staff member, the Muslim student is feeling particularly drained, that they can step into that space without disturbing anyone, that would definitely be appreciated for some, I think.
Yeah, really quick, just to add to that, like a good accommodation that we sometimes see schools do is like, if you don't want people to miss class lunchtime, some students don't want to sit in the cafeteria. So that could be a time where if you have a quiet room, that they're not missing anything important, but they could just sit there and kind of just like rest for a little bit. So if that is allowed in your school and policy, that's like a suggestion that we see happen a lot in schools.
Thank you. And then one other thing that I'll add is that we know that our buildings can get really warm as the weather outside starts to warm up. I know it's the second day of spring, but you wouldn't know it going outside, but it is going to start warming up soon and probably before Ramadan is over. And so if you're aware of like certain spots in your building that get really hot, maybe to provide extra fans in that area, or just to be, cognizant of those who are covering up a little bit more during the month and who aren't able to drink water. We aren't able to chew gum or, suck on a lozenge or any of that either. So there isn't much that we can do to alleviate those kinds of discomforts, but controlling the temperature is something that can be helpful in order to help us, stay focused and stay comfortable as much as possible, especially in some of the older buildings.
One last thing here, as you said something, Noreen, that it reminded me of something that Dr. Willis said earlier on, that when we speak about folks who are exempted from fasting, you may have a student or a staff member who starts off the day fasting, but due to something happening during the day, whether it be something physiological or they're just not feeling as well as they started off the day, they're allowed to break their fast, right? They're allowed to stop fasting for the rest of that day. So again, right, really giving space for folks to approach the month how they need to approach the month, with all of the things that are pertinent. to them.
And this point hasn't come up yet, but I think one thing that really helps Muslims sustain their fast throughout the day is being well satiated throughout the evening when we are allowed to eat and drink. And so if you know of students that come from families who don't have the fortune to be able to access food and drinks and beverages freely, maybe you can offer them a bagged lunch to take home with them so that they can get some extra nutrients in throughout the night, just to go along with their meal so they can have it, maybe when they wake up for support or something like that. That can also be a really great way to support families who are observing the month of Ramadan, who might not be well off financially, so that they aren't missing out on that free meal that they typically would receive. This question is going to go to Asia, our CARE Philadelphia representative, and to Dr. Abdullah. What is the best way to support elementary school students that participate in Ramadan, and are they required to fast as well?
Yeah, so it was stated earlier, so like the requirement is like puberty, but we see a lot of like younger students. So typically I think the age like 7, you see a lot of like Muslim parents kind of like starting your child to like fast, or they'll come pray with them and things like that. But there are some like very ambitious kids. So they like, I have a couple cousins, but like one cousin in particular, like, she was so excited to fast because she sees all the adults near her. So she like wants to do the whole day, and she's doing well and all that. So supporting them in that. So like, although they might not be at puberty, so you might think like they aren't required, they might want to, and kind of supporting them in that. And then for those who aren't fasting, or sometimes you'll have like a kid that does like, I know like to start off, we used to do like half a days, me and my sister, to like prep us. So that's a thing, but also in school doing like activities. So if you could find like books about Ramadan, or decorations and decorating your classroom, like incorporating that into your classroom. I think when students are of any faith or any culture, like see their culture being represented, it like makes a lot of a difference. So trying to incorporate things like that, I say is the best way to support them.
Thank you, Asa. You mentioned the half-day fasting. As a parent of kids in the as a parent of kids in the K to 2 age group right now, they want to do the fasting, right? They want to fast, and they may fast up until lunchtime, right? So they're fasting from 8 a.m. until lunchtime. So yeah, we get them, and we have them understand that that's fine. So if we see if you have an elementary school kid who says, I'm fasting today, and then you see them pull out their lunch, I would say definitely don't stop them from doing it. That is well within their understanding, or they're trying to get an understanding of what fasting is. And another important thing I think is to just make sure that there's a conversation with parents where possible, right? That because some students will come into school. One of my kids went into school and said they're fasting and just wanted to fast the entire day. And we had no knowledge of that, but because other students were fasting, they chose to do that. So I think it's important to check in with the parents, because some kids will say, my parents said that I have to fast. And that may not have been a conversation they necessarily had with the parent before they showed up to school that day. So just really, where possible, for the elementary school kids, just having a conversation with the parents, if possible, just to see that this is exactly what the expectations are, what the expectations are, or what conversations they have had with their kids, and what they have said, what they have spoken to their kids about. I think that definitely goes a long way in figuring out what type of support that particular elementary school student needs. Go ahead, Asia, sorry.
No, you brought up like exactly, I was going to add that point. I know of one school they send out for their like Muslim families, or to everybody, but like if you know your student may want to fast, especially because they are elementary school, like a permission slip of what the parent normally feels is okay for them to do. So when they do like come to school and start fasting, or don't, like, so you just know that already ahead of the time that this kid might pray in school, or the parent might say, oh, that we don't really require them. Like those kind of things, having that like permission slip, I thought was like a unique idea for that line of communication.
Thank you. Do either of you also want to touch on level of activity?
Asia, you want to tackle this? You can go ahead, Asia.
Yeah, I know one of the things like for students, gym time is a big thing we see. So if you know that, I don't know if this is what you meant or level activity, but so like gym, if you know that might be Ramadan might be the time where you want your students to like run laps, like trying to avoid like those bigger things or excusing them from gym and trying to figure out other requirements that they can do is a big thing. If they can sit out from strenuous activities or like field trips, you know that if you can kind of like look in the beginning of the year and you know that you have this huge like walk heavy field trip that if you can avoid putting that during like Ramadan or something like that, that's also a big help. I don't know if Dr. Abdullah, you want to add anything?
That was nothing to add here.
Thank you. So the next question is going to go to Doha, Raed, and Asia. How can non-Muslim co-workers and friends help someone who is fasting?
I would say like taking a time to learn about the significance of Ramadan and the fasting ritual throughout Islam to develop more understanding. And also the flexibility and understanding and adjustments to work or schedules are appreciated. And I guess like in general, above all, your willingness to engage in meaningful conversations to foster that sense of inclusivity and support during that important time.
I would say understanding and patience with your coworkers, staff, and friends, and being mindful. Like as we know, you're not only fasting stomach wise, as Dr. Willa said, you're fasting with your ears, your tongue, your eyes. So, watching the profanity, not playing music around you, all that stuff to like be taken into account while you're around your friends and staff who are fasting.
Yeah, no, I think that was perfectly said. I know like since it is like the coworkers, so that's the older adults, but remember like if they're a coffee drinker, they didn't have coffee since before that Fajr prayer. So like you're going all day, you have like coffee headaches for some people. So like if a coworker that normally is like super bubbly is like more reserved and quiet, like not taking it personally, it is like a long day of not eating. So just kind of having grace for any Muslims that are fasting, I think is the biggest thing, but they were well said.
And if I can chime in, I think one of the things that, and I'll go with the direction that Asia went with the older folks in the space. It's not necessary to apologize each time you eat around a Muslim who might be fasting. I think that sort of like calls it out and puts them on the spot, and very comfortable with folks eating. Folks don't have to stop eating because Muslims are fasting. Eat, feel comfort. That's perfectly fine. And most Muslims who even new Muslims who are fasting or Muslims who have been fasting for a while are comfortable with people eating around them. They may excuse themselves if they need to. I think allow them to excuse themselves. Going back to the talking less, this is one of the unspoken truths that is one of these internal things that we know about, but we don't necessarily say publicly. But I think in this conversation, I feel like I can trust you, so I'll say this. Some Muslims may talk less because, and anyone who has not eaten for a while, you know that the odor of your mouth changes, right? The odor of the breath changes. And so you might find that Muslims come down to the end of the day, they may be speaking a lot less, not just because of fatigue, but because of the consciousness of the odor that your mouth may give off after not eating for a long time. Or you might find that they're talking to you, but they're more turning to the side. It's not a sign of disrespect. It's just this consciousness of this idea that the breath odor shifts after you've not eaten for a while during the day. So just something to keep in mind as you see Muslims change their behavior, that it's not directed towards you, but it's how they are conscious of how they are appearing in the space, how they're engaging the space, and also maybe just as many folks have mentioned, how they're trying to connect with their Lord in that time. If I revealed an internal secret here, please forgive me for that.
Well, Dr. Abdullah, I do want to ask you to clarify one thing. I just want to make sure we haven't confused our audience in any way. So we spoke earlier about providing accommodations for students as far as, providing them with a separate space that they may be able to go to during lunchtime to avoid being around food. And we talked about food in the classroom. And then we just said now that it's okay to eat in front of the Muslims. So I understand what you mean, but if you could, for the audience, just clarify the difference between the two things, and then, just you said a brief statement that kind of did clarify, but if you could just go a little bit further.
Sure, absolutely. So there may be, and as I said, right, this is more for the ones who are older, because the accommodations for the students, I think, if we can allow them to be out of the cafeteria and stuff like that, that definitely wants to happen. I think so for co-workers who are working in the same space, right? You might find if you're in the staff room and your Muslim colleague has not left the staff room and you come in to eat, you don't necessarily have to apologize to your Muslim colleague in the staff room for eating in front of them, if that clarifies it a bit. Or maybe there's an event after work, and the Muslim colleague is just showing up for a short while and then leaving. You don't necessarily have to apologize for eating in front of them in that case. I think the accommodations to allow them to separate themselves, to allow them to be by themselves, to allow them to step away from the engagement is definitely important. However, if they have chosen to be in the space, you don't necessarily, if they have chosen to be in the space where that particular activity is taking place, the apology isn't necessary in that case. Yeah. Noreen, did that tweak it a bit?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Okay.
providing them the option for a space to go somewhere if they would like to, but not, but for you personally not to feel like you can't go to the cafeteria or the staff room to eat because that Muslim colleague is there. Dr. Willis, I did see your hand up.
Thank you. I just, because we're on this topic, I don't want to lose it. Something Dr. Abdullah made me think about just the way that you approach Muslims who are fasting, and to assure you that fasting is not a burden for us, it's a blessing. And so what I've noticed also is that there's like when you encounter us and we're fasting, it's like, oh, how are you doing? Are you okay? Like, and there's almost a sympathy. And I just want to encourage non-Muslims who are interacting with us that you don't have to ask, are we okay? Or to emphasize that, I couldn't do that. Like it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing for us. And something that a coworker of mine has been doing, and this it's been a couple of years now for me. She doesn't ask about the fast. She asks, like, how's your Ramadan going? Did you have spiritual goals this year? She's not a Muslim, but she just wants to know, what are you doing this year for Ramadan? How are you observing besides the fast? And I get excited to be able to share with her and that she's interested. And so if you want to ask about Ramadan, ask about Ramadan more holistically so that it doesn't have to be an emphasis on the burden of the fast.
Thank you so much for adding that. And so we're going to just go on to our final thoughts. Any other final thoughts, advice that you would like to share with the audience to best support their Muslim students and colleagues during Ramadan?
I did have something I wanted to share. And it's really just emphasizing, Dr. Abdullah said it at the beginning of the program, the importance of being proactive and planning and having these conversations, not in a seasonal way, right? A lot of the things that we're talking about are not exclusive to Ramadan. They are things that Muslims need throughout the year. And it's important for non-Muslims and Muslims, right, to be a part of the conversation advocating for what we need. I want to share that, like, about 9 months ago, my colleague and I requested support to be able to get a permanent prayer space here at the Education Center at 440 North Broad Street. And we recently got access to a temporary prayer space, and we're really grateful for that. And we're still in the process of trying to get that permanent space. And we're asking for this space not just for our individual needs, like I personally need a prayer accommodation, but we think it's important for anybody who visits 440, parents, visitors, staff who are coming in and out of the building, to be able to have it and to know that it's available. And so it's one thing to develop a personal plan for someone, it's another for our schools and our buildings to have spaces that people can come and go to meet their needs. And so I just wanted to quickly share something that we do in the Office of Professional Learning that I've really appreciated. Throughout the year, when we have on-site events, if it's at an off-site location or even in an SDP school building, we have a lactation room and we also have a prayer room. And at the start of the program or the event, we announce that these are available to people, and we note where they're located so that people can just access them, that they don't have to feel like they have to, get a special accommodation in the moment, that it's available to them. And so that's just something I would encourage offices to consider, schools to consider, the district to consider, having those spaces available that people can access freely, as opposed to having to discuss this in the middle of Ramadan, that we're having this conversation year round.
Thank you so much.
One thing, were you gonna add on to that? Because I'm going in a different direction. Okay.
No, I'll follow your direction. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, another thing was that, like, even though this is centered around Ramadan, like the conclusion of Ramadan is Eid. And so going back to that like lunar calendar and how long Ramadan is, like remembering to like Eid, people celebrate that on different days too. So like being mindful that the school district like does and it's on the calendar and you guys have off, so which is like wonderful and a good like thing for other school districts to kind of follow. But I'm not sure, I forget which day it is. I think like Tuesday. But if you have a student that like it doesn't come on Wednesday instead or something, like having that grace as well, because it also follows that same like structure of when they started fasting and when the moon is sighted. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
And lifting that up with where Daniel and Asia took this in terms of things that happen outside of Ramadan as well. One of the things that we've spoken about prayer during the day, the regular daily prayers. One of the things that schools may hear more requests for, particularly during Ramadan, is a Friday prayer in particular, right? And that's a slightly longer conversation, possibly in the 7 minutes that we have left. But part of the engagement with Ramadan and outside of Ramadan is connecting to the Creator. There's this mandatory Friday prayer that Muslims do engage. And for some students, the older students, particularly during this month, they may find that they need to or they want to have the Friday prayer. The Friday prayer doesn't have to be a long prayer. It can literally be about 10 minutes. And there's some more resources that would need to be discussed around that, but just something to keep in mind that may also bubble up, and it's not that's something that is out of the ordinary. It's something that they may just decide to latch on to more during the month of Ramadan, and the Office of Muslim Engagement and other departments in the school district can definitely help you think through that a bit more as a resource for how to help navigate that in some of the spaces. So just wanted to point that out there. One last thing I would say, I know we've been speaking a lot about how those who are not Muslim can, and how the schools can support the Muslim students or those who are fasting. One thing that I do want to say, because we spoke about washing up and stuff like that during the day or for prayer, sorry. If you realize that that when the Muslim students go in and they're making a lot of mess in the bathrooms and stuff like that, that's something that we can raise, right? That's something that you can raise and say, hey, you know what, is there a different, like this is leaving a dangerous situation for others. Is there a different way that you can, like what can you do to not splash that much water on the floor? And if there's nothing that can be done differently, then that might be another resource, like leaving a mop or something like that in something. And I don't want to set policy for because there's safety reasons and stuff like that, but figuring out how can we keep the spaces clean and safe for everyone in spite of the increased use of water in that space. And if there are noise complaints and stuff like that, like really having conversations. So how can you make these things more orderly and efficient and safe for everyone? Are conversations that administrators and officials shouldn't be afraid to have, simply because it's Ramadan, you don't want to disturb it, right? Because one of the tenets is really living in a more harmonious way around these accommodations that are being engaged here. So really figuring out what is the best approach for your school. One size is not going to fit all, but really figuring out what's the best approach for your school to keep, to allow everyone to feel like they're welcome, to allow everyone to engage, to allow the Muslims to engage their faith the way they need to engage it, but also making sure that the space is left safe and comfortable for others who are using that space as well. So these conversations are bigger conversations that can be had as well.
Yeah, I think one final thing that I would like to bring up that I think hasn't been brought up yet is our last prayer of the day is after 8 p.m. and then after that a lot of Muslims go to the masjid and they do Taraweeh prayer, which can last up to 2 hours. And then during the last 10 days of Ramadan, a lot of Muslims are seeking Laylatul Qadr, which is a special night for us. And so they may be up even later, or they may be up very early in the morning, like by 3 a.m., doing additional prayers and such. And so you may notice that towards the end of the month, some practicing Muslims may seem even more fatigued than usual. And just to be cognizant of that, we do have district policies and we do have required instructional hours. So we can't make, adjustments for when we can start school and things like that, but we can just be aware of that and just be, sensitive to that. And I think that concludes our panel discussion. Kyle?
Nice. Thank you so much, everyone. Just want to take time out to thank all of our panelists. Really appreciate your time, your expertise. This was very informative and we appreciate it. What I will do, I know that many people, educators and staff aren't able to make it during the day. So what I'm doing now, I'm going to drop a link to our YouTube page here at the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This will be available on YouTube, so please feel free, send it to a colleague, send it to a friend, community member, or a teacher, and just help them learn a little bit more. We also have past videos from last year, which we did with ASEA at CARE Philadelphia as well. So we'll look forward to continued programming for topics such as Ramadan, and we really appreciate your time today. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Like,
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.